Welcome to video number 2. This is the series Hope for a Better Marriage, and this is the second of 3 parts. In the first part, we talked about having better conversations, and I'm really hopeful that you have had the opportunity to look at this and listen to these videos with your spouse. I believe that one person can change a marriage, so even if you are viewing this by yourself, then the things that we talk about here you can put into play in your relationship, and you can begin to see some fruit from those efforts. But the first video we talked about having better conversations, then there were 3 of those. And then what I want to talk about with you now is having better conflict. We'll finish in the 3rd video on kind of bringing it all together and creating a better culture for your marriage. So I want to start off with this whole idea of the emotional love tank again, like we talked about in the first video. Now, we all think of a tank as a reservoir that goes up and down, obviously. So as energy levels are poured into your relationship, so your energy levels and your capacity for listening and learning in your marriage goes up with it. Now, this is a little bit different. Here's what I want to share with you. The distinction between confidence and anxiety. They are indirectly related. In other words, as your confidence level in your marriage increases, by default, your anxiety levels are going to decrease. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but that's a big deal. Because most couples, if they just could reduce anxiety a little bit in their marriage, it would make a huge difference. So I want to talk to you about some ways to do that. One sure way to raise the confidence level in your relationship is to have better conflict. Now, our culture doesn't like the word conflict. We think of it as a negative thing, it's a bad thing, something to be avoided. But as a marriage therapist, I embrace it, and because I see opportunities. My belief here is that good, productive conflict can actually be more of a deposit in your love tank than almost anything else that you have going on in your relationship. So I want to look at 3 tools with you that you can have better conflict in your marriage. All right, now the first one we've already taken a short look at. It's a circle back. I want to go into a little more detail this video than we did the first video because there's another way of referring to it. A circle back, you can also call it a TAP session. TAP is timing, approach, and presentation. And so we've talked a little bit about those as well. Timing is obviously something to pay attention to when it comes to conflict. Sometimes 2 people can be at odds because they just weren't in the right mood, it wasn't the right time, maybe they were getting ready for bed, so you want to be a student of timing. You also want to be a student of approach. Your approach is your mindset. So when you come into a conversation, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, this goes badly every time we try this, I hope this will go better, then your mindset from the very beginning will sabotage you before you've even started the conversation. So you want to have a mindset that though this maybe didn't go so well last time, it can go better this time, okay? Presentation's a little different. Presentation is how I present myself. It's the word choice that I use. It's the tone. It's maybe the volume that I use. It can be even use of an I statement where I'm expressing myself. We'll get into that more later. Instead of a you statement where I'm either attacking you or denigrating. So I want to make sure that I use all 3 of these components, timing, approach, and presentation, when I utilize a circle back. Now they come with some rules of engagement. You ready for this? All right. When it comes to a circle back or a TAP session, you want to make sure that you understand that you answer the question, what went wrong? So a lot of times the reason why couples will sweep a conflict under the rug is because every time they try to go back and talk about it again, they just jump right back into the conflict again. Let me give you a term here that you may have heard before. It's called the Fishbowl Effect. The Fishbowl Effect, imagine you're sitting in your living room and there's a coffee table with a fishbowl and a couple of goldfish and it's full of water, all right? So you're talking about the fish, you're on the outside. You wouldn't, in your wildest dreams, think about jumping into the fishbowl and swimming around with the fish to talk to the fish. You're going to stay on the outside of it because that's the safest place for us because we have to breathe, right? Right, if you want to breathe in your conversation, then you want to go back to what went wrong, but you don't want to jump into the fishbowl. In other words, we're not going to jump into the contents of the conflict. We're going to ask, look, was the timing off here? You know, maybe I had an approach issue. Maybe I wasn't thinking right when we sat down together. Maybe my presentation was more of an attack. You see what I've done? I'm not jumping into the fishbowl when I'm asking these questions. And if you sit down with your spouse and you ask those things, then you're gonna realize that talking about what went wrong rather than what the wrong was itself, you'll have a productive conversation. The second rule is the goal is to learn, not to teach. So when I sit down, I want to work through something that we got off track about a little while ago. I'm sitting down with trying to understand what my spouse is trying to tell me. I'm not trying to get my spouse to understand what I was trying to say. I call this crawling into your spouse's inner world. And if both of you take that approach where you're trying to really understand what the other person is thinking and feeling, I think you're going to discover that those conversations, when you circle back, are going to go a lot better. The last thing I'll say here is this: humility goes a long way. And so when you want to circle back, you want to ask the question, what small change in me would most help you? Seems simple, doesn't it? What small change in me would make the most change for you? What would help the most? And when you ask a question like that, you're setting a stage for you and your spouse to be able to have some productive conflict. All right, so the circle back or the TAP session. Here's the second one. These are I statements. Remember we talked about in the first video that a you statement has to be uplifting, it has to be a blessing. You know what? You're right. I did say that. You have been really great lately at listening to me. And whenever you use a you statement in that context, then you're not presenting a scenario where somebody would have to be defensive. So an I statement is basically an expression of need. It's I saw, I heard, I felt, I want, I'm hopeful. And when I express myself from an I perspective, my spouse really can't get defensive because I'm only sharing my experience. I want to share something else here along these lines. I really feel like this may be true, especially for men. The one way to help with I statements and I perspectives is to build an emotional vocabulary. There's a difference between someone saying, I felt and I felt like, or I feel and I feel like. This is gold, so I hope you catch this. Whenever someone tries to tell you how they feel, and if they use the word like, they just shared a thought. Think about this. When someone says, I feel like, they usually look up. They're kind of looking around. They're sharing a thought. It's very cerebral. But when someone says, I feel betrayed, they usually don't look up with hope. They usually look down like there's this heaviness about it. No one ever says, I feel like angry or I feel like hurt. So be aware of that. That emotional vocabulary is better built when you lose the word like and you just say how you really feel, all right? So I statements. I statements are a great way to engage in some productive conflict with your spouse. All right, the third one, no text fighting. No text fighting. I've never seen fighting over text be productive. Sometimes in a session, somebody will break out their phone and they'll start reading this long discourse between them and their spouse, and it's really just mean-spirited talk. Do you realize that 80% of communication is nonverbal? That means when you're texting somebody that almost over half for sure, but 80% of what's being said isn't being processed at all. If you want to communicate through text, I encourage you to use it only for like positive you statements, for information sharing. And oh, by the way, here's something you might find interesting. There's basically 4 styles of communication. Style 1 is shop talk. It's basically information. Style 2 is issues, which has to do with either my issue or issues that we're facing as a couple. Style 3 is emotional needs. And style 4 is conflict. I know that's a lot all at once here, but let's stick with me. Style 1 is shop talk. Style 4 is conflict. Style 1 is shop talk. Style 4 is conflict. A lot of couples, that's the way they communicate. They're either on the surface or they're in conflict. Why? Because if you leave out style 2 issues, style 3 emotional needs, then that's what your relationship's going to do. And it kind of feels like a roller coaster or a boomerang. It just keeps going back and forth. So you want to make sure if you're going to use texting, stay in the shop talk arena. Okay? If you're going to have a productive conversation, you really should sit down and have some more face-to-face communication. All right? Now, those are the 3 tools that I wanted to share with you. All right? So they're circle backs or TAP sessions. The use of I statements, and then finally, no text fighting. Use that for uplifting, encouragement, or information sharing. All right, now, I want to give you 3 more things to think about here. Having better conflict requires more proactive communication. More proactive communication. That means that couch time and check-ins, like we talked about in our first video, is something that you're going to have to utilize on a more regular basis. You should plan those things out. Plan to sit down and have some time to be able to talk face-to-face in a proactive measure. All right? More proactive communication. Secondly, you need to have more face-to-face interaction. When you use your circle backs and when you use your I statements, you're staying out of the fishbowl. All right? And then number 3, you want to eliminate digital conflict. Make conflict into a deposit. I know that sounds a little bit odd, but when you're planning to sit down and discuss something together that used to get under your skin in the past, essentially what you're doing is you're creating, and I'll get into this in the next video, you're creating a new cycle of communication. And anytime you can throw something new into your communication pattern, what you're doing is you're revamping what used to be what we call the old cycle, and you're creating something that's new and fresh and more helpful. All right. I'm excited to get into this next area with you because it's going to contrast these 2 worlds between an old cycle and a new cycle. And I want to encourage you this as well. If you haven't already done this, hopefully you have your PDF file with you in a workbook format and you're able to take some notes, write down any questions. I really do encourage you to email me any questions or concerns that you may have. Email is going to be provided there in your materials. Feel free to do that. I'll make sure to get back to you. Also, if you haven't watched this with your spouse, maybe you can encourage them to come along and watch it with you. And obviously it would be better if you could start from the very beginning so they can see it all in context. But I hope that you're learning something really positive and productive for your marriage. You know, I really believe that what Lao Tzu said is true. He said, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. When the student is really ready, the teacher will disappear. Now, I'm not going away yet. I have a few more things I'd like to share with you, but there will come a time when you'll have this material down, and it will do what we're hopeful to talk about in the next video, is build a better culture in your marriage so that suddenly you're not having to think about it now. It's just the way you operate.